and good afternoon. It is noon on Friday, which means it is time for our lunch and learn. Now, I do have a slight tickle in my throat, so hopefully it's not going to be too difficult to listen to this. But this is a new report. It's a long report, so it may take me more than just one lunch and learn setting. But it's about the dietary guidelines and how the lobbies are doing what they're doing and why we have the food and why we have the additives and all that kind of stuff. And so this particular report talks about what we can expect from the new administration and how they're working with Kennedy in order to help make our food supply just a little bit safer. Now, the new dietary guidelines are still being finalized, and President-elect Trump has encouraged Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to go wild, that's a quote, go wild on the food. So I think everybody would know that we have a lot of things that we eat that are not real foods. And so why is that? Why do we have foods available here in the United States made with ingredients that are not allowed in other European countries or even South American countries? Why is that? Well, that is because we have a very robust food lobby, and they petition the laws and do all the things that they do so that we are able to have these ingredients. And so the ingredients are not great. They're actually poison to us, and so we're going to be talking about that. So the report says that there are diet-related illnesses in this country that cost more than $1 trillion annually. The guidelines, the dietary guidelines, shape the way we eat. And so it stands to reason that if we have a $1 trillion bill for our health care every year and our dietary habits contribute to the state of our health, then we really need to have these looked over and maybe redrawn. So Kennedy's leadership could have significant changes, including stricter scrutiny over ultra-processed foods and a push to reduce corporate influencing over the federal health recommendations. Now, there is a guideline body called the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee, so it's DGAC, and it is preparing its report. Now, one of the things that you need to know is that all of the additives and the preservatives and the flavorings and all that kind of stuff that are in our processed foods make our processed foods very, very addictive. Now, I didn't know this until a few months ago when I listened to a webinar, but back in the day, when I was a little girl, right, doctors that would be seen on advertising saying that it was okay to smoke. Now, we know, 60 years later, we know that smoking causes cancer, and there's a Surgeon General warning on the cigarette packets and that kind of thing. In fact, they wanted to even make the warning stronger, but the FDA said no. Now, why would they say no? Because someone is paying them and giving them lots of money to vote the way that the corporations want them to vote for. So, back in the day when cigarettes were deemed to be cancer-causing, the three companies, one was, I can't remember all the names, but there were three major companies that were cigarette companies. They saw the writing on the wall. They bought the three biggest food companies, got their scientists that were making cigarettes so addictive with their additives and all that kind of stuff. They got those scientists to come over to the industrial food complex, and start making the foods addictive with all of their additives and preservatives and flavorings and all that kind of stuff. So I did not know that. I did not know that the scientists behind the fast food industry, packaged foods, not just where you go, when you're getting home from work too late to cook something, but even the packaged food industry, they had these scientists come in and develop these recipes to make these foods very, very addictive. And so I didn't know that. And it made me kind of sick at my stomach that our food is being, I don't even know what the right word is. It is being fabricated, for lack of a better word, by people who made cigarettes addictive. And so I thought that was really, really bad. So the DGAC is the people that decide what kind of dietary guidelines to have. Now, if you've ever been to a hospital or you've ever been to a school, and we all have, those dietary selections are governed by the American guidelines for dietary guidelines for Americans. It's updated every 5 years, and all of these updates go to food assistance programs as well, such as the Supplemental Nutritional Assistant Program. But the guidelines don't just appear out of thin air. Behind them is the DGAC, a panel of nutritional scientists and public health experts. Over 2 years, the committee reviews research, gathers public input, and compiles a report to inform on the final recommendations. Now, the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee reviews the science and makes the recommendations. Richard Matt, a nutritional scientist and a member of the 2020 DGAC, says, the report also goes to the HHS and the U.S. Department of Agriculture, USDA, which finalizes the guidelines. Now, this dynamic has led to controversy. In 2020, the DGAC proposed stricter limits on added sugars and alcohol, but those suggestions were ultimately rejected. Why would that be? Because the lobbying money got in the way and it influenced the way people voted. The DGAC is preparing its current report, and the process is expected to continue through 2025. If confirmed as HH Secretary, Kennedy will oversee the implementation of these guidelines and will shape their final form. Now, the DGAC has proposed notable changes since 2020, emphasizing a shift toward plant-based eating and reduced reliance on animal-based foods. Now, this recommendation prioritizes plant-based proteins such as peas, beans, and lentils, reclassifying them entirely as a protein rather than a vegetable. The committee also highlights soy, seeds, and nuts as key protein sources and suggests reordering the protein group to reflect this emphasis, putting nuts and seeds first, followed by seafood, poultry, eggs, and then meat in the final position. Now, one of the things that you need to know, and if you are aware, you already are aware that you can go and buy synthetic meats, okay, vegan, plant-based. I don't even think they're plant-based. I think they are genetically engineered meats. And so that's what this particular DGAC is recommending, that we have a more plant-based diet. Now, I'm okay with plants. I don't have any problem with plants, but I don't want to eat a vegan steak that's made out of something that's not 100% beef. Okay, I don't want to do that. I don't care what it tastes like. I know that what's in it is not necessarily healthy, and yet these are the guidelines that the DGAC has been promoting. Americans are also advised to limit overall meat consumption. For those eating a 2,200 a day calorie, the DGAC suggests further cutting of weekly poultry, meat, and egg intake by an additional 3.5 to 4 ounces compared with its previous recommendations. That means for the week, you should only eat protein about the size of a deck of cards or about the size of the palm of your hand. Now, I don't know about you, but when I go to a really nice steakhouse and I get a steak, I want to get the 6 ounce, maybe the 8 ounce, maybe even the 12 ounce, depending on how hungry I am. And I'm just telling you that 12 ounce is way bigger than the palm of my hand. The recommendations have ignited debate, of course, from the National Cattlemen's Beef Association that calls these proposals out of touch, warning that they could harm groups of older adults, adolescent girls, and women of childbearing age by risking their nutritional deficits. All right, so this particular association, and of course, it's biased towards beef. I'm a carnivore. I'm biased towards beef. I'm just going to let y'all know that. I try and do organic wherever possible. And the advice, they say, does not consider that plant-based proteins are not as complete as animal proteins and therefore not as digestible to people. Now, I will agree that plant-based proteins are not complete in their amino acids. I would not argue that they are not as bioavailable or not as digestible. Plant proteins can contain extra carbohydrates, which complicates the efforts to combat obesity and diabetes, and I would agree with that. The DGAC also suggests that reducing starchy vegetable consumption, a proposal that the National Potato Council called unsupported by nutritional science. Instead, the council advocated boosting vegetable intake across all categories. So there's nothing wrong with a potato, all right? There's nothing wrong with a white potato, a yellow potato, a golden potato, a red potato, a sweet potato. Potatoes are good, okay? If you have rheumatoid arthritis or any kind of other autoimmune disease, you probably need to limit this in your diet because nightshade vegetables do cause problems with people with autoimmune issues. But for the rest of us who are healthy, potatoes are not a problem. So the committee recommends 6 daily servings of grains, limiting refined grains to 3. Despite health concerns about refined carbohydrates, the DGAC retained them in the guidelines for their nutrients such as iron and folate. If you live here in the United States, we are against grains, not because of the grain itself, but we are against grains because of the way grains are processed here in the United States. In our industrial farming complex, all of our grains, to the best of my knowledge, are sprayed twice with Roundup pesticide that contains glyphosate. Glyphosate is a poison to the human body. It is a poison to your digestive system, and it can also cause sterility. And so we don't really want you eating grains unless you are eating grains that are 100% organic. And even then, you know, the air is the air, and if this farmer sprays with glyphosate, some can drift over to this farmer who doesn't spray. He could have an organic designation on his crop. You're going to get some residual overflow on that. So we want to make sure that you really understand what you're doing. So I'm not an advocate for grains. I like the way they taste, don't get me wrong, but I really limit them in my diet because of the potential poisoning that can happen. So there's a Dr. Tekloitz, and she questions this decision, pointing out that red meat, a natural source of bioavailable hemi-iron and folate, is simultaneously being reduced while the committee is recommending having all of these grains. So the committee emphasized a diet centered on whole foods, vegetables, fruits, legumes, whole grains, nuts, and fish, while also recommending water as a primary beverage and continuing to suggest low-fat and non-fat dairy products. I'm not a fan of non-fat dairy products because dairy products naturally have fat in them, and if you are taking a naturally occurring nutrient out of a food, you are genetically modifying it or chemically doing some things because that fat just doesn't come out. You've got to take it out. You've got to put something in there to take it out. And the food is not as nutritious for you as it would have been if you had just left it alone. So for decades, the dietary guidelines have shaped how Americans eat, but their legacy is marked with controversy. Introduced in 1980, they shifted focus from the overall nutrition to targeting fat intake, blaming dietary fat for heart disease and urging Americans to swap butter for margarine and adopt a low-fat, high-carbohydrate diet. Now, we know today that all of that is fake news. It is just not true. We know that a diet high in fat does not contribute to cholesterol. We know that a diet high in fat does not contribute to obesity. So this is something that the lobbying people did. They gave us the message. I don't know, depending on how old you are, you may have heard the message that eggs are bad for you because they're full of cholesterol. It's going to make your cholesterol numbers go up. Well, that is not true. Are eggs full of cholesterol? Yes, eggs are full of cholesterol. But is it the bad kind of cholesterol? No, it isn't. the thing that drives bad cholesterol is inflammation in the body. And so whatever is causing inflammation, whether it's parasites, pathogens, viruses, funguses, heavy metals, all that kind of stuff, all of those things cause problems with inflammation. And so your body's natural response to inflammation is to raise your overall cholesterol number. Eggs do not raise your cholesterol. Eating butter does not raise your cholesterol. So in the holistic world, we want you to eat what occurs naturally out of natural elements. So if you've ever read the ingredients in margarine, it's not natural, and so we don't want to be doing that. Before the 1980 guidelines, Americans consumed about 45% of their calories from fat. The new recommendations reduce this to 30% while suggesting that carbohydrates should make up 55% to 60% of the total daily calories, primarily from grains. Now, if you do this, you're going to get all that glyphosate, and that glyphosate is going to cause you problems with your gut. This shift became the foundation for the now debated food pyramid of the 1990s, which emphasized grain as the base of your food pyramid. That means of all the foods that you eat, you want to eat grains more than you want to eat anything else. In response, the food manufacturers reformulated the products to align with the low-fat guidance, often adding sugar and refined grains to maintain flavor and appeal. The phenomenon, dubbed as the Snackwell effect, referring to the rise of low-fat but highly processed food snacks. These changes fueled the increased consumption of processed food, indirectly supporting trends that now some researchers link with the rising rates of obesity and diabetes. Now, just a little backstory on this. When I was in England, I read a book. Somebody recommended to me to read this book. It was called The Hip and Thigh Diet. Now, I don't know exactly what the diet was. It was kind of loosely based on the Atkins diet, I think. And I did that diet, and I lost quite a bit of weight in my hip and thighs. That's the kind of build that I have, and that's where I hold my weight. And so I can't remember how long I did the diet, but I was very, very pleased with the results. And then when we came back to America, we lived in England at the time, we came back to America, and I found these Snackwell cookies, and they were chocolate, and they were fudge, and they were all the things that I love, and they were low fat, low sugar. I think they were sugar free, actually. And I thought, well, what a miracle. Of course, this is before I knew anything about health. What a miracle that we have these nice, tasty treats that are low fat, low sugar. So because of that, and because of how popular those cookies were, that they named this phenomenon the Snackwell effect. Although the food pyramid was officially retired in 2011 and it was replaced by the My Plate, its legacy persists as a broad messaging it promotes about grains, fats, and sugars, and it continues to influence the dietary habits. Even though it meant to encourage consumption of whole grains and small portion sizes, the pyramid's putting grains at the foundation of the healthy diet inadvertently induced the food industry to vigorously market highly processed grain products. This was said by Marion Nestle, a food policy expert and a former member of the DGAC. Now, I wonder if she's connected with the Nestle company, you know, the one that makes chocolate, Nestle's Quick, and all that kind of stuff. I wonder if she's related to them. It wouldn't be far-fetched to think that she would be. And, you know, a lot of our processed foods, if you look on the packaging to find out what's in the food, most of the words you cannot pronounce. They are not natural ingredients. These are something that has been produced in the lab to make these foods very, very enticing. And they are addictive. And you want more, and you're never satisfied. And that's because that is the way they are designed. Now, Carlos Monteiro, a Brazilian researcher and expert on ultra-processed food, faulted the food pyramid for failing to differentiate between food types. He says the problem with the food pyramid is not the emphasis on grains and grain products. It is the failure to distinguish whole grains from processed and ultra-processed products. So while refined carbohydrates such as sugars and sweets are placed at the top to be consumed sparingly, the pyramid's wide base for grains does not differentiate between whole and refined options. Monteiro added that to this oversight extends to other categories as well as meat, dairy, fruits, and persists even in the newer model of the My Plate that also overlook food processing. Now you might want to, and I've got a graphic that shows the pyramid and the My Plate side by side, and there is a distinct difference. I'll try and find that and see if I can post that for you. But we need to understand that neither one of these is accurate, and both of these are put forth by this agency, and this agency is heavily influenced by corporations with lots of dollars. And so this is one of the things that Mr. Kennedy wants to change. He wants to make sure that our food recommendations and our dietary recommendations are recommended by people who don't have a slice of the pie, right? So let's just say my company, Abundant Health and Wellness is my company. My company makes XYZ food. We're just going to say that. We don't, but we're just going to say that for argument's sake. If I make XYZ food and I'm on this committee, I'm going to petition to have my processed food included in the food pyramid or included in the My Plate, because the more people buy my product, the wealthier that I'm going to be. And so this is called a conflict of interest. And so, we want to get rid of that. And that's one thing that Mr. Kennedy wants to do, is get rid of the conflict of interest. People that are at the top of corporations who make these foods should not be able to tell us what food should be in our diet. Now, in a 2015 meta-analysis that highlighted foundational flaws in these guidelines, revealed that the early dietary fat recommendations were implemented without any evidence from random controlled trials. The guidelines were very weak on science, namely epidemiological studies, and with these studies, it's easy to get the desired results. And so this is one of the things that scientists put forth their papers, peer-reviewed, so people can look at their studies, look at how they're designed, and see if they were designed well. Well, these particular studies that this guy is talking about, they were not designed well, and they were so loosely constructed that you could pretty much get any result that you wanted, and they're going to publish the result that benefits them. Why? Because it's a conflict of interest. Now, ultra-processed foods make up 60% of the average American's daily caloric intake. That's a lot. Think about what you eat. Do you eat 60% of ultra-processed food? Now, that's something in a box or a package, right? So we can take chips, crackers, candies, cookies, anything in a box or a package. I mean, honestly, even Lunchables are in a box and a package, right? What is in them that is not really a real food? So these ultra-processed food dominate our grocery store shelves and our diets. They include the packaged snacks, sugary cereals, frozen meals, soft drinks, many of which are made with ingredients such as high fructose corn syrup, hydrogenated oils, and artificial flavorings. While convenient and shelf-stable, they are strongly linked to obesity and diabetes and heart disease. Now, just want to kind of segue here, because everybody knows what high fructose corn syrup is. But hydrogenated oils, I was reading some information a couple of weeks ago, and it said that most people with cancer do a lot of seed oils in their cooking and baking, and they were saying about how toxic these seed oils are. And so if you look at what is in the packaging, you're going to see safflower oil, you're going to see canola oil, you're going to see sunflower oil, you're going to see corn oil. So all of those have glyphosate in them. And glyphosate, we know from looking at recent reports, we know that if you have been exposed to glyphosate over a long period of time, there is a correlation between that exposure and cancer. And so we don't want to have that in our diet. We do know that if you are obese, Okay, that means your body mass index is over 33 for a woman. If you are obese, you are, I think it's twice as likely to be diabetic. And then if you're diabetic, you've got 4 times the chance of having cancer. So when you're eating these foods, right, it has an effect on your metabolism, and that has effect on your health. Now, scientists disagree on how to define ultra-processed foods and why the distinction matter. The NOVA classification system developed by Monteiro is the most widely used framework for categorizing foods to the extent and purpose of their processing. It defines ultra-processed foods as those made with industrial ingredients such as hydrogenated oils, flavor enhancers, emulsifiers designed for convenience and longer shelf life. While there are other systems that do exist, there is no universal standard, which is complicating the efforts to assess the food's health impacts into our daily lives. Now, the DGAC declines to make specific recommendations against ultra-processed foods, citing limited research. Now, I'm all for research. However, when you're looking at all the research, and you can pull from this and pull from this and pull from this, you don't have to be an Einstein to figure out that hydrogenated oils are detrimental to your health. You don't have to be an Einstein to understand that when they're using flavorings and colorings from insects, okay, this is not necessarily a food that you need to be having. And if you actually knew what you were getting in your food, you probably wouldn't eat it, okay? So, countries such as Brazil, France, and Israel have adopted dietary guidelines that explicitly advise against ultra-processed foods. Advocates view these policies as models for the United States to follow in combating disease-related or diet-related diseases, all right? However, the DGAC's cautious stance indicates that the United States may lag behind in adopting similar recommendations. Now, Kennedy has signaled that he is unwilling to wait for perfect science. During the campaign, he called ultra-processed food a major driver of the obesity epidemic and hinted at stronger regulations to come. So, one of the things that we need to understand, and I think this is a very good thing, when I lived in the United States years ago, I wasn't very picky about my food, and there is a food that I did eat. It was easy, it was convenient, and I don't want to kind of call anybody out here, but I did eat it, and I did eat it on the regular. When I moved to Scotland, I found the same thing, and it had a totally different taste. Now, why is that? It's because the additives that were in the United States product was not in the European product, and it tasted totally different, that I didn't want it, okay? I didn't like it. And so this is what you're going to find. If Kennedy has his ways, and he gets all of the ultra-processed food ingredients out of the food, you're going to reach for your favorite, whatever it is, and the taste is going to be different, and you're not going to want it. All right, so just be prepared for that, because while we don't want you doing convenience food, everybody does. But as they change those ingredients, your taste buds are going to have to catch up to that, and you're not going to want it because it's not going to taste the same. Now, what I do in order to protect my health, because none of us eats properly, some of us eat better than others, some of us know more than others, some of us make conscious decisions, right? So one of the things that I do, and I've shown you this before, but this is something that I take every day, twice a day. What is this? These are called Life Pack Nano Vitamins. And yeah, there's a lot, but I'm older and I need a lot of protection. And I love this because it's all in a little packet. I have it in the box. It comes in a box. I take the top off the box, put it in my cabinet, and after my midday meal, after my dinner meal, I pull a packet out, I take these, and why do I take these? Because these are made from food, okay? They have all of the antioxidants that you need from food, so you're not going to be missing anything. And why do I take them twice a day? Because the scientists that made them say that there's enough nutrition in one packet for 12 hours, and you want to have a packet for 12 hours and then another packet for 12 hours. And so that's what we do because we want to maintain our health. I don't eat 100% like I should. It is said that we need to have 35 different fruits and vegetables every week. I don't do that. I don't know anybody that does that. But that's okay because when you've got a food source vitamin that is able to be absorbed in your body, then you're getting those phytonutrients that you need, and so you don't have to be as particular about what you're eating. Now, does that mean we want you to eat processed food? No, it does not mean we want you to eat processed food. But if Mr. Kennedy have his way, then the processed food is going to taste a lot different. And the second part of this report, which I'm not going to get to today, is all about the conflict of interest with the corporations that sit on these boards and that formulate these foods and why they've been allowed to go in our diet. So we may do that next week. We may not, just depending on kind of how things go. But just be aware, if you consume a lot of processed foods, and if Mr. Kennedy has his way, you're not going to like your processed foods, and you will change in spite of what you are wanting to do, because it's just not going to satisfy your taste buds anymore. So choose wisely, be aware, and get something like this. If not this, get something like this so that you're meeting all of your nutritional needs from a good, clean source so that you're not going to go over into sickness and disease, especially those that are diet-related, obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular, and also cancer. None of us want those. That's a lot of information that I've given you today. Like, share, ask your questions, all those kind of things. It is the weekend. It's going to be cold. It's going to be cold. Even in South Texas, they're predicting snow on Tuesday, so be very careful. Get some relaxation, get some restoration, and be refreshed. And I will see you next Friday.